In most of Western civilization and culture, the sun represents light, warmth, and the sunlight also is that which feeds life and is also connected to goodness and order versus the chaotic, cold and destructive darkness. But in the Middle East, historically, the sun has been heavily tied also to destruction, drought, chaos and disease. Light can, after all, be highly destructive when you think about it. And the color yellow, connected to the sun, is also connected to disease, which often follows in the wake of a drought during a period of heavy sunshine, as the destruction of food due to the drought, of the crops being destroyed under the heavy sunshine and the lack of rain, and the lack of nutrition often leaves people vulnerable to diseases, not to mention the people that starve to death and the corpses spreading disease due to being rotten under the exposure of the heavy sunlight coming from the Middle Eastern sun. The connection between the sun and disease goes way back into Middle Eastern history, and you can see it with Nergal Shamash, the Mesopotamian god or goddess of the underworld and justice, but also the sun god or goddess and a god of disease, because the sun and disease were intrinsically linked in the minds of the ancient peoples of the Middle East. And there does actually exist similar elements of a similar view also in European mythologies too. For example, the Greek god Apollo, who was the Greek god responsible for moving the sun up in the sky, and who was also associated with disease as well. So it is not entirely unique only to the Middle East of associating the sun with disease. The Greeks did too. Now granted, the Greeks did live pretty close to the Middle East, and parts of their populations have historically also lived in Asia Minor, in what is modern day Turkey, which is part of the Middle East as a region. And a hypothesis of cross-cultural influence and borrowing from other cultures between the various cultures of the Middle East and the Greeks is not impossible or even unlikely. Or it could also simply be that the climate in Greece and in Asia Minor is similar enough that an association between the sun and disease becomes a natural association due to droughts and heavy sunshine being associated with periods of great disease spreading. And it could also just be a combination of cross-cultural influence combined with these environmental factors too. Also, notice that I called Nergal Shamash a goddess and not only as a god. This is because the sun in several Semitic languages is a female object. In most Indo-European languages, the sun is actually considered masculine, except for Germanic languages, and is contrasted with the female moon. Whereas in Semitic languages, the moon is male. Again, Germanic languages and cultures being an exception here, since the moon is considered masculine. In ancient Middle Eastern traditions, there is also a contrast between the sun as the chaotic element of the world and the moon being the element of order. Because the moon is also connected to time and order, months, and time for the Mesopotamians, Jews, and eventually also the Muslims was defined by the cycles of the moon, as they all followed or follow a lunar calendar and not a solar calendar. And actually the word month in English actually shares a similar word origin as the word moon, if you go far back enough in Indo-European language development. So ancient Indo-European peoples used to measure time by the cycles of the moon rather than the sun originally too. It was just that later solar calendars based upon the cycles of the sun began to dominate in Europe later, and then later spread as the standard found all around the world due to European cultural influence. But the practice of a lunar calendar still remains in religious traditions, in Judaism and in Islam. And speaking about Islam, in Islam, good light is nur, associated with the moon, and the or harsh brightness or light, that is more destructive or more neutral, intense light, is associated with the sun. Furthermore, in Arabic folklore and Islamic esotericism, the jinn, the fire spirits found within Islamic traditions, are said to be the most active when the sun is at its zenith in the middle of the day. And jinn, evil, fire, and the heat from the sun are tightly associated together, especially when you consider the fact that the jinn and the sun are both heavily connected, often to idolatry and to worship other things that are not God, which is the gravest sin you can commit within Islam. But the sun is not only associated with idolatry within Islam, as you see similar associations between the sun and idolatry also in the Jewish and Christian Old Testament, where there are warnings against sun worship as a form of idolatry. And there also exists certain traditions about the sun blinding people from the truth with its light. And Lucifer, the light bringer, the fallen angel, the devil, being associated with the sun as well. Though, with that said, in Roman Christianity and then in later Western cultural traditions, the sun became a much more positive symbol generally, as a symbol associated with God's guiding light and God's gift of beauty to mankind in his creation. But generally, the view of the sun is actually quite negative in Jewish and non-Roman, non-Western European Christian traditions, where the sun is viewed with a lot more suspicion as being something that is potentially dangerous, corrupting, or even evil. So there is quite a difference and breadth of interpretation related to the sun as a symbol and object in the sky. But basically, symbolism reflects the environment. In cold, dark Europe, the sun is viewed more positively as the harbinger of warmth and life. And in the hot, sunny Middle East, with the ever-constant risk of droughts and destruction coming from the harsh light of the sun is viewed more negatively, as a potential destructive element. And in contrast, shadows are seen as protective in many Middle Eastern traditions, whereas in European traditions, shadows have usually been associated with evil and bad things, as the element that hides evil and conceals it from righteous judgment. Speaking about righteous judgment, that is actually a part of certain old Middle Eastern traditions, in that the sun might be seen as destructive and chaotic at times, but it has also traditionally been connected to judgment and punishment. Nergal Shamash, the deity of the sun in ancient Mesopotamia, was after all also the god of the law of Hammurabi. And light, like the light coming from the sun, is many times associated with judgment and divine will in the Bible as well. The symbolism of the sun is quite complex, but in short, the sun is a celestial object that depends a lot on its context with regards to its symbolism. And its symbolism often has a dark side and a more bright light side, which might itself be the darker side, as in the negative side, or actually pretty bright as in a positive way too. Because judgment can still be positive as well, even if it is harsh and destructive. And I hope you liked this video and found the dual symbolism of the sun that I described in this video interesting. Please post comments and ask questions in the comment section, and I will try to reply to you as quickly as possible.
Please do subscribe, as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities.
اشتركوا بالقناة في مثلكم.